In Luke's Gospel, does Jesus promise an exemption for believers from those events that precede his parousia? Does Luke 21 verse 36 exclude any idea of a pre-wrath rapture? This is what my friends Michael and Annie Nissim are claiming. In a moment we'll hear their main argument, but firstly I would remind my audience that this is a debate between friends, and I am not taking issue with them personally, but with what I believe to be faulty reasoning and bad arguments. I am rebutting their assertions, not questioning their motives or character. This particular video is a response to their video entitled Luke 21 Ruins Pre-Wrath, which can be found at one of the links below.
When Michael and I watched the video 7 Problems with the Pretrib Rapture, we noticed there was some cynicism concerning pre-tribbers disregarding parallel passages. And I just wanted to point out that there is a glaring parallel passage that creates a huge problem for the pre-wrath model of the rapture that was not touched upon at all in the 2.25 hour video that we watched concerning pre-wrath. And that parallel passage is Luke 21. We read in Luke, "And there shall be signs in sun and moon and stars, and upon the earth distress of nations." In verse 26 we read, "For the powers of the heavens shall be shaken." And verse 27 of Luke, "And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to come to pass, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws nigh." Luke goes on to give the same parable that Matthew recorded, the parable of the fig tree, which we looked at in Matthew. And again in verse 33, he records the same statement that Matthew recorded Jesus as having said, "Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away." Now, in Matthew, following this, Jesus goes on to give some rapture parables about one being taken and one being left, and about the judgment overcoming everyone who dwells on the earth. Now, Luke's parallel passage says this, "But take heed to yourselves, lest haply your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly as a snare. For so shall it come upon all them that dwell on the face of all the earth. But watch ye at every season, making supplication, that ye may prevail to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man." Now, just to recap what we described in our video on Matthew 24, we explained there that according to the pre-wrath model, Matthew 24 culminates in not the second coming of the Messiah in glory, but rather in the rapture of the church. And according to the pre-wrath model, all of the events described in Matthew 24, and therefore also in Luke 21, describe events that precede the rapture of the church. This is according to the pre-wrath model. And according to the pre-wrath model, these passages culminate in the rapture, after which there are no details given and no mention of the second coming of Christ in glory. Now, the problem with this suggestion and this model is found in Luke 21. And the problem is this, that Jesus says in verse 36 of Luke 21, that you should be watching at every season and praying, making supplication. Why? So that you may prevail to escape all these things that shall come to pass. What things? The things that he's just been describing, that the pre-wrathers say describe events that occur before the rapture. So how can we pray that we would escape them if they are events that anyway take place before the rapture? Rather, we should understand that there is a possibility for us to escape all of these events that Jesus describes in Matthew 24 and in Luke 21, that we may escape these events. And how? By standing before the Son of Man, not by being preserved on earth. So just to remind you, Luke says that these troubles will come on all them that dwell on the face of all the earth. And how can we escape them? By standing before the Son of Man. And what events can we escape? The events that are described in Matthew 24, that Prewrathers say no believers will escape. But Jesus says that we can escape these events that he describes and stand before the Son of Man. Prewrathers state that there is no escape for anyone of any of these events, and all of them take place before the rapture. That means we should go through all of them right up to the very end. So while pre-tribbers have been accused of not taking into account parallel passages, here is a parallel passage that presents an insurmountable difficulty to the pre-wrath rapture model. This verse allows no possibility for the pre-wrath rapture model, as described in the video that we saw. And the coming of the Son of Man, described here in Luke and Matthew 24, that the pre-wrathers want to convince us is the rapture of the church, cannot be the rapture, because Jesus promises us the possibility of escaping events that precede that coming. Therefore, it cannot be the rapture, because we are promised the option of being raptured before that coming and before all of the events described before that coming. In my opinion, these verses alone are sufficient to put the whole pre-wrath model of the Olivet Discourse to naught.
Before proceeding further, I should mention that this video from my friends contains the same misconstruing and misrepresentation of what Prewrath teaches as their former video on Matthew 24. I would refer you to my previous video refuting their assertions about Matthew 24 for proof that they have not accurately understood or represented Prewrath teaching on this matter. The idea that Prewrath has somehow erased Jesus' second coming from the Olivet Discourse is of course completely false, and I have absolutely no idea where they get this from. What Prewrath does actually teach is that the rapture is simply part of the glorious coming or parousia of Jesus as described in Matthew 24:27-44. And though not exclusively so, the material that Jesus relates to us in the Olivet Discourse is much more concerned with the preceding events to and the opening stages of his glorious parousia than what follows after. The wrathful judgments that follow the gathering of the elect in Matthew 24 are detailed for us in the book of Revelation after the opening of the seventh seal. All of this, of course, is material for a future video. Let's now return to our topic of Luke 21 verse 36. Luke's account of the Olivet Discourse is a parallel with Matthew and Mark's. It contains most of the same material with a few minor differences, and some of the parallel material to Matthew is found scattered through chapters 12, 17, 19 and 21 in Luke. There are some, like Arnold Fruchtenbaum, who claim that Luke's account, or parts of it at least, referred to the events of 70 AD, while Matthew's is all to do with the 70th week. For a number of very good reasons which are outside the constraints of this presentation, that notion does not really hold up to scrutiny. Luke's account is just as fully eschatological as Matthew's, and I would refer those interested to the article linked below. Ironically enough, the very fact that these are parallel accounts actually undermines my friend's assertions about this verse, as we shall see in a moment. In regards to Matthew 24 and the Olivet Discourse, many Pretrib theorists, including my friends, as we shall see in a second, claim the gathering of the elect in Matthew 24 does not refer to the rapture at all, but rather to the gathering of Israel at the end of the age.
So this clearly speaks about the end of the 70th week, when Jesus comes with all his revenge and coming in glory, coming from heaven to reign on earth. And then and only then it goes to verse 31.
And he shall send forth his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other.
Notice many people have mistaken this verse to be speaking about the rapture, but it is not speaking about a rapture. It is speaking about the regathering of Israel, God's elect nation.
Yes.
The pre-trib position here really presupposes that the disciples are being addressed by Jesus as representatives of national Israel and not the church. And therefore, in effect, the Olivet Discourse has nothing to do with the church at all, but is, as pre-trib theorist Thomas Ice puts it, Old Testament. However, this has certain consequences when you make claims like the following.
Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Now, in Matthew, following this, Jesus goes on to give some rapture parables about one being taken and one being left. The coming of the Son of Man, described here in Luke and Matthew 24, that the Prewrathers want to convince us is the rapture of the church, cannot be the rapture, because Jesus promises us the possibility of escaping events that precede that coming. Therefore, it cannot be the rapture, because we are promised the option of being raptured before that coming and before all of the events described before that coming.
I think that most listeners will already have seen the glaring problem here. You cannot assert, on the one hand, that the Olivet Discourse has nothing to do with the church and does not refer to the rapture, yet in the next breath say that Matthew 24 verse 40, 2 men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left, etc., is a rapture parable, or that Luke 21 verse 36 is a rapture promise. Denying on one hand that the Olivet Discourse has anything to do with the rapture, but on the other hand cherry-picking the same discourse for rapture promises or rapture parables, reveals an interpretive double standard and an arbitrary hermeneutic that changes according to the whim of the interpreter. This is pre-trib rapture theorism having its cake and wanting to eat it as well. When these kind of interpretive practices are employed, the scriptures can be made to say just about whatever you want. The fact is that Jesus' Olivet Discourse parables about watchfulness are actually better described as parousia rather than rapture parables, because all of them refer back to the very event on which he was discoursing, the aforementioned parousia, and how to remain ready for it. My friends are asserting that in Luke 21 verse 36, Jesus is telling his disciples that believers can avoid all these things he mentioned previously by being raptured before they happen. Luke, however, tells us that when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Luke 21 verses 28. So clearly the followers of Jesus are being told that certain events, these things, must happen before Jesus' parousia, and their redemption draws nigh, and that these signs would be observable. And Jesus says explicitly that they are to watch for them, because they herald their redemption. So what are they to watch for? Well, we've got Luke 21 verse 20. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near. And then, of course, there are the celestial phenomena. Luke 21 verse 25. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations, in perplexity, because of the roaring of the sea and the waves. Of course, these are paralleled in Matthew 24. Verse 15, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, etc. Then in verse 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that the summer is near. So also when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Jesus is explicitly warning believers that they will need strength during that time to stand against the pressures arrayed against them. Spiritual deception, intense persecution, being universally hated, and the economic hardship that these things will entail will bring with them pressure to apostatize, to exchange the faith for economic survival and a full stomach. This would tie in well with his other statements, that the one who endures to the end will be saved, Matthew 25, verse 13, or in Luke, where it is even more directly given to the disciples, by your endurance you will gain your lives, Luke 21, verse 19. Jesus applies this endurance command to his elect, which we have already established in my other video dealing with the Olivet Discourse of Matthew 24, that it cannot be national Israel, but only those who believe in him. In Luke 21, verse 36, the Greek word behind that, in the phrase, praying that you may have strength, is ina, a word which specifies intent or purpose, and has more the force of in order that. So we would read in Luke 21, verse 36, but stay awake at all times, praying, in order that you may have strength to escape all these things that are going to take place, and to stand before the Son of Man. Jesus would be referring here to the believer's need for heavenly empowering to prevail against those things that will come upon the world during the tribulation period. And he is commanding them to pray and be watchful, in order that they may weather the pressures and escape the deceits and entanglements that will surround them during the Antichrist's tribulation against the church, and that they would consequently be able to stand before the Son of Man unashamed and vindicated at his return. Believers will escape all these things, not by standing before the Son of Man, that is to say, vacating the planet before these things occur. Such an idea is simply not present in the text, but by paying heed to Jesus' warnings about spiritual deception and counterfeit parousias and false Christs, and by staying faithful in the middle of trial, and by watching and enduring throughout this time, looking for the promised signs of his return, and by expectantly waiting for the Lord to be revealed from heaven, to take us out of the midst of our persecutors, and gather us to himself, thus bringing us into his rest, immediately before he pours out his wrath on an ungodly world who have rejected him and persecuted his people. Luke 21, verse 36, is actually detrimental to pre-trib rapture theorism. For if Jesus expects his followers to be able to see all these things, such as the abomination of desolation and the signs in the sun, moon, and stars, that clearly occur before and even actually herald his parousia, and as he warns them against the spiritual deception that will prevail at that time, then it should be obvious that he is not anticipating their removal to heaven before these things occur, or he wouldn't be bothering to give such instruction and warnings in the first place. The pre-tribulational argument being advocated by my friends here makes Jesus explicitly contradict himself. Their argument portrays him as exhorting his disciples to pray that they may avoid seeing the very things he commands them to watch for. This exegetical faux pas could have been easily avoided by taking heed to the context, rather than simply reading their own presuppositions into the text. A brief comment is merited here also on the word escape. My friends are assuming that it automatically carries the idea of avoid altogether. The Greek word behind the English here is ekphevgo, meaning to flee, to run away. While it is used in some biblical contexts with the shade of meaning of avoid, it certainly can and does also carry the meaning of escaping out of the midst of a bad situation you are already in, such as in Acts 19, where the sons of Scevas tried unsuccessfully to cast out a demon, and the demonized man turned on them, beating them severely, and it is recorded that they fled, ekphevgo, from the house, naked and wounded. From all the other evidence in the context of the Olivet Discourse, it is clear that this is the shade of meaning intended in Luke 21, verse 36. So then, all things taken together, Luke 21, verse 36, a verse that is being touted as a conclusive evidence for Pretrib theorism and a killer blow that supposedly brings Prewrath to nothing, when read in context, actually demonstrates the falsity of pre-tribulational rapturism and supports Prewrath. May the Lord bless you in your study and reading of his word. Bye for now.